Hi, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. My name is Andrew. I'm the lead pastor at the Crossing Church in Costa Mesa. And if you're new, if someone shared this video with you or invited you to watch with them this morning, I'm really glad you're with us. And for all of you who were with us this weekend, you know we kicked off a brand new series called OMG. And you'll remember years ago, OMG was a pretty famous text you'd send to someone when you heard some crazy news or something excited happen. You'd just respond, OMG. Stands for oh my goodness or oh my God. But what you may not know is that in the Bible, oh my God is used 20 times. 20 times authors cry out to God in a moment of chaos or crisis and surprise. And they just cry out with those words, oh my God. And then often it is followed up with a prayer. God save me. God heal me. God rescue us. And so in this series, we're looking at what we learn about God in moments of crisis. And what we've been doing this week, and we're going to do for the next few weeks, is we've been looking at the life of Moses. Moses is one of the most famous celebrities in the whole Bible. And if you were with me this Sunday or Saturday, I shared with you that at the end of Exodus chapter 1, there's this little story that I didn't have time to go into just because I didn't want to make you sit for an hour and a half and listen to me teach. But today I want to share one of my favorite stories in the entire book of Exodus. It's often overlooked. People kind of breeze right past it, but I think it is a powerful story for us today. So here's what I want to ask. I want to ask you, if you got a Bible nearby, I want you to grab it. I want you to grab something to write with, take some notes, because we are going to just dive into Exodus chapter 1, just a few verses. So try to do that while you're also watching this video, because we're going to be going back and forth from the text. And I'm going to share some things about it that I think are going to apply to us today. And so Exodus chapter 1, verse 15. We're back, rewinding all the way back to ancient Egypt, where the people of God, the Hebrews, they're enslaved to this foreign power. Egypt was the most powerful ancient world power to exist back then. And we find in verse 15 what happens. It says, the king of Egypt, now pause there for just a second. This would be Pharaoh, the most powerful man to ever live. Pharaohs back then were seen as gods. And so whatever they said was seen as a decree, as if directly from God's mouth. So it was to be followed without second thought. Pharaoh was the most powerful, wealthiest person to ever live. So this is a guy who's never heard the word no. One day Pharaoh calls in 2 Hebrew midwives. Now midwives were the lowest rung of society in the ancient world, and they're Hebrews, meaning they're already second-class citizens. And so we have this huge power differential to start our story. We have Pharaoh, who with one word could have these 2 women killed and suffer no consequences for it. And so Pharaoh calls them in to see him. And again, verse 15, it says, the king of Egypt, this is Pharaoh, he said to these Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. He said, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. Now the midwives, however, they feared God, and they did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. So here's what's happening in the story. Pharaoh gives a command. We need to reduce the population of the slaves. So to these 2 women, he says, every boy that is born, you are to kill. Now here's the struggle for these 2 women. And these are real women who lived. If they do what Pharaoh asks, they could never live with themselves. But if they choose to disobey, Pharaoh will have them killed. And so what do? It says they feared God. You see, here's the secret to this story. You see, this is a scary moment in their lives. But deep down, underneath everything, at the center of their lives, there is a fear of God. Now this word fear, it doesn't mean like terrified, like God's going to strike you with a bolt of lightning, but it means reverence, a respect. And so these 2 women, they respect God. God, the maker of human life. And they say, whatever comes our way, we could never take the life of another. And then our story continues. It says, verse 18, Verse 18, then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives, and he asked them, he says, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? Well, the midwives answered Pharaoh, and I love their response here. It says, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So here, these two women, this is their act of civil disobedience. Pharaoh comes back to them and says, what are you doing? And they say, like, well, our hands are tied. We can't help you, Pharaoh, because before we can even get to the Hebrew's house, the babies are born. So can't help you. You're on your own with your own problem. Now, is that true? Is that really how things went back then? Probably not. But for them, this is an act of courage, of saying, Pharaoh, we will never do what you ask us to do. Now, I want to pause here in our story for another second for a couple reasons. Because what you and I have to be asking ourselves is, why is this story in the Bible? You see, in just a few verses, Pharaoh will come up with another plan. He will tell all of Egypt, any baby born to the Hebrews, throw into the Nile. And so this story doesn't necessarily move the plot along much farther. But here's what we see in this story. We have three characters. We have Pharaoh, and then we have Shiphrah and Puah. And what you've probably picked up by now is it's fascinating that no name is given to Pharaoh, is it? Like, if we were writing a story, the person whose name we'd put in the story is obviously the famous one. The person who's important. The person who has clout or influence. But not this story. You see, Pharaoh, in fact, scholars to this day argue and debate who this Pharaoh actually is. No one knows. You see, Pharaoh, the most famous man at that point to ever live, his name is lost for all of human history. No one knows who he is to this day. But whose names do we know? Two Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Now, the name Shiphrah means beautiful. The name Puah means flower. And I think what our author is doing, and what I think God is doing in this story, is you see God looks down from heaven, and he sees this scene unfold. And he sees everyone bow and cower to Pharaoh. Everyone except these two women. And God looks down at them and he says, you are beautiful. You are like a precious flower to me. Because you fear God. You choose to stand up against injustice. And we see at the end of the story how God rewards these two women. Verse 20. It says, so God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives, because they feared God, he gave them families for their own. Now here's what I want you to do. If you got a Bible in front of you, if you got something to write with, I want you to circle those two names, Shiphrah and Puah. Because these are two women who have no power, no influence, no money, no backing. And they stand up to the most powerful person to ever live. They stand up for what's right. They do justice by their people. And God sees it and God rewards it. Now here's my question for you this Monday. As we start this week, what does it look like for you to do justice? What does it look like in whatever position you find yourself in today? Staying at home parent, working from home, hourly wage worker, CEO, whatever your job is today, what does it look like for you to do justice? Because I believe we have a God who looks down from heaven. We have a God who looks down and he is waiting for people who are willing to stand up against injustice. God's waiting for you to do that very thing today. You know, a great verse, if you're looking for a verse to memorize in the Bible, it comes from the book of Micah, one of my favorites. And so you can turn there if you have a Bible nearby. You know, if you have yours, go to Micah chapter 6, verse 8. I got my Bible right here, and I'm just going to read verse 8. This is a great verse if you're looking for something to memorize this morning. It says, "And what does the Lord require of you?" This is Micah chapter 6, verse 8. "And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God." Today, my hope and prayer is that we are people who walk humbly before our God. Thanks everyone for joining us. I want to encourage you, make sure you stay connected to our church this week. We got some exciting updates coming, and boy, I'll tell you, I cannot wait for us to continue to walk through this series, OMG. I'll see you this weekend, everyone. Take care.